Lucas Bennett stood frozen at the edge of the cemetery path, staring at a woman he had never seen before. She stood in front of his mother's grave, still and silent, not crying, just existing there, like she was facing a confession she had carried too long. When he finally asked who she was, her answer stopped his breath cold. "Your mother saved my life years ago," she said quietly. But that was not all she was hiding. Why had this stranger stayed silent until now? And how would this debt from the past reshape the life of a father barely keeping his daughter fed? Lucas had woken up that morning the same way he woke up every morning, tired, late, and already behind. The alarm on his phone had stopped working 2 weeks ago, so he relied on the sound of Sophie stirring in the next room. She was 6 years old, and somehow still believed her father had everything under control. He let her believe it, because the alternative was too cruel. The apartment they rented was small and smelled faintly of mildew no matter how many times he scrubbed the walls. The paint was peeling near the windows, and the heater only worked when it felt like it. Lucas had called the landlord 4 times about it, but the man never picked up anymore. He knew why. They were 3 months behind on rent, and every day Lucas expected to find an eviction notice taped to the door. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, if he could find something that fit between the cracks. During the day, he unloaded trucks at a warehouse on the south side of town. At night, he washed dishes at a diner that stayed open until 2 in the morning. The pay was barely enough to keep the lights on, and some weeks it was not even that. Sophie ate first, always. Lucas had learned to skip meals without her noticing. His mother had been gone for 8 months now. Dr. Helen Bennett had been a surgeon, the kind of woman people spoke about with respect, even after she left the room. She had raised Lucas alone after his father walked out, and she had done it with a kind of quiet strength that made everything seem possible. When she died, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. She had been his last safety net. When things got bad, she had been there. Not with money, because she had spent most of her savings on his education before he dropped out, but with something steadier. She had believed in him even when he stopped believing in himself. Now she was gone, and Lucas was failing in ways he could not fix. He visited her grave once a week, usually on Saturday mornings, before his shift at the warehouse. It was the only routine he kept that had nothing to do with survival. Sophie stayed with a neighbor during those hours, an older woman named Mrs. Callahan, who asked for nothing in return, but sometimes left a bag of groceries by the door when she thought Lucas was not looking. This Saturday had been colder than usual. The sky was low and gray, the kind of weather that made everything feel heavier. Lucas had walked through the cemetery gates with his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his breath visible in the air. He had brought nothing with him, no flowers, no candles. He could not afford them, and his mother would have told him not to waste the money anyway. Her grave was near the back, under a tree that had lost all its leaves. The headstone was simple. Her name, the dates, and nothing else. Lucas had wanted to add something more, some line that captured who she had been, but the funeral home charged by the letter, and he had already gone into debt just to bury her. He had been standing there for maybe 5 minutes when he noticed the woman. She was older than him, maybe in her early 40s, dressed in a long coat that looked expensive but worn, like she had owned it for years and refused to replace it. Her hair was pulled back, and she stood completely still in front of his mother's grave. She was not crying. She was not praying. She was just standing there, staring at the headstone like it owed her an answer. Lucas did not recognize her. He was certain he had never seen her before in his life. For a moment, he thought about turning around and leaving, giving her privacy. But something about the way she stood there felt wrong. Not dangerous, just out of place. Like she did not belong, but also like she had every right to be there. He cleared his throat, and she turned toward him slowly. Her face was calm, almost too calm, like she had been expecting him. "Can I help you?" Lucas asked. His voice came out rougher than he intended. The woman looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You're her son." It was not a question. Lucas felt something cold settle in his chest. "Yeah, I am." She nodded slightly, then looked back at the grave. "I'm Claire Morgan. I don't expect you to know who I am." Lucas waited. When she did not say anything else, he stepped closer. "Did you know my mother?" Claire's expression shifted, just barely. Something like regret or maybe guilt. "She saved my life." The words hung in the air between them. Lucas stared at her, trying to make sense of it. "What do you mean?" Claire finally looked at him again, and this time her eyes were different. There was weight in them, the kind that came from carrying something for too long. "Years ago, I had a medical emergency, a surgical complication that should have killed me. Your mother was the one who operated. She stayed in that room for 11 hours to make sure I made it out alive." Lucas felt his throat tighten. He had known his mother was a good surgeon. He had heard the stories from colleagues, from patients, from people who owed her their lives. But hearing it now, from a stranger standing at her grave, hit differently. "When was this?" he asked quietly. 15 years ago, Claire said. "I was young. Stupid. I ignored symptoms I should not have ignored, and by the time I got to the hospital, it was almost too late. Your mother did not give up on me, even when the other doctors said there was no point." Lucas looked down at the grave, at his mother's name carved into the stone. He could picture her in the operating room, focused and unshakable, refusing to let someone die on her table. That was who she had been. That was who he had lost. "Why didn't you ever come see her?" The question came out before he could stop it, and it sounded harsher than he meant. Claire did not flinch. "I left the country not long after I recovered. I had a job offer overseas, and I took it. I told myself I would come back and thank her properly, but I kept putting it off. Then the years passed, and it felt too late. When I finally came back to the States and tried to find her, I found out she had passed." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Shame, maybe. Or regret that had turned into something harder. Lucas did not know what to say. Part of him wanted to be angry at her for waiting so long, for letting his mother die without ever hearing that thank you. But another part of him understood. Life got in the way. People told themselves they had time, and then suddenly they did not. "She would have been glad to know you made it," Lucas said finally. Claire looked at him, and for the first time, something softened in her face. "She talked about you, you know. During the recovery, I was in the hospital for a few weeks, and she checked on me every day. She mentioned she had a son, said you were smart, that you were going to do something important." Lucas almost laughed, but it came out as something closer to a sigh. "Yeah. Well, things didn't exactly turn out that way." Claire studied him carefully, her eyes moving over his worn jacket, the stubble on his face, the exhaustion he could not hide. She did not ask, but Lucas could see the question forming. "I'm doing fine," he said quickly, before she could say anything. Claire did not look convinced, but she did not push. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small card. She held it out toward him. Lucas hesitated, then took it. It was a business card, simple and clean. Claire Morgan, followed by a title he did not fully understand, and a phone number. "I owe your mother everything," Claire said. "If you ever need anything, call me. I mean that." Lucas looked down at the card, then back at her. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Claire said firmly. "It's a debt, and I'd like to repay it." Lucas wanted to hand the card back, to tell her he did not need help from strangers. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she said it, like she genuinely meant it. Or maybe it was the fact that he had exactly $73 in his bank account and no idea how he was going to make rent next week. He slipped the card into his pocket without another word. Claire gave him a small nod, then turned and walked away, her footsteps quiet on the gravel path. Lucas watched her go until she disappeared through the cemetery gates. He stood there alone for a while longer, staring at his mother's grave, the business card heavy in his pocket. He did not believe Claire would actually help him. People said things like that all the time, and they rarely followed through. But he kept the card anyway, just in case. The text message came 4 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, while Lucas was stacking boxes in the warehouse. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he almost ignored it because he was already running behind on his quota for the day. But something made him pull it out anyway. It was from his landlord. Short, direct, and exactly what Lucas had been dreading. 3 months overdue. 1 week to pay in full or vacate the premises. No exceptions this time. Lucas read it twice, then shoved the phone back into his pocket and kept working. His hands moved automatically, lifting and sorting, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He had known this was coming. He had been telling himself for weeks that he would figure something out, that he would find a way to catch up. But the math did not work. It had never worked. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Lucas stood on the narrow balcony outside their apartment and smoked a cigarette he had bummed off a coworker. The air was cold enough that his breath mixed with the smoke, and the city stretched out below him in a grid of lights that felt both endless and suffocating. He did not smoke often anymore, could not afford to, but tonight he needed something to do with his hands. He thought about the eviction notice, about Sophie's school, which was 2 blocks away, and the only stable thing in her life right now. About the fact that he had nowhere else to go, no family left to call, no savings to fall back on. He had been poor before, had grown up without much, but this was different. This was failing his daughter in a way that felt permanent. His hand brushed against something in his jacket pocket, and he pulled it out without thinking. The business card. Claire Morgan's name printed in clean black letters, the phone number beneath it. Lucas turned it over in his fingers, the edges already slightly bent from being carried around for days. He had not seriously considered calling her. It had felt like charity when she offered, and charity was something Lucas had spent his entire adult life avoiding. His mother had raised him to stand on his own, to work for what he needed, to never ask for handouts. But this was not just about him anymore. He looked back through the glass door at the apartment, at the small lump under the blankets on the couch where Sophie slept. She trusted him. She believed that no matter what happened, her father would keep her safe. And right now, Lucas was about to prove her wrong. He pulled out his phone, stared at the number on the card, and made the call before he could talk himself out of it. It rang 3 times before Claire answered. Her voice was clear, professional, like she had been expecting someone to call, but had not been sure who. "This is Claire." Lucas almost hung up. His throat felt tight, and for a second, he could not make himself speak. Then he forced the words out. "It's Lucas Bennett. We met at the cemetery." There was a brief silence on the other end, and then Claire's tone shifted. "Lucas, yes, I remember." He gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white. "I need to ask you something, and I don't want you to think I'm looking for a handout. I'm not." Claire did not interrupt. She just waited. "You said you owed my mother," Lucas continued, "and that if I ever needed anything, I should call. So I'm calling, but I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for work, any kind of work. I'll do whatever you need. I don't care what it is. I just need something steady." There was another beat of silence, and Lucas hated how desperate he sounded. But he had run out of options, and desperation was all he had left. "All right," Claire said finally. Her voice was calm, measured. "Can you come in for an interview tomorrow? 10 in the morning?" Lucas blinked. He had expected questions, hesitation, maybe even a polite refusal. But she had just said yes. "Yeah," he said quickly. "I can do that." Claire gave him an address downtown, told him to ask for her at the front desk, and then the call ended. Lucas stood there on the balcony for a long time after, staring at his phone, not quite believing what had just happened. The next morning, Lucas woke up early and went through his closet looking for something that did not look completely worn out. He settled on a pair of dark jeans that were only slightly faded and a button-down shirt he had not worn in over a year. It was wrinkled, but he did his best to smooth it out with his hands. He could not afford to get it dry cleaned. Sophie watched him from the doorway as he got ready, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. "Where are you going, Dad?" "Job interview," Lucas said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Sophie's eyes lit up. "Are you going to get a new job?" "Maybe," Lucas said. He knelt down in front of her and straightened the collar of her pajamas. "But even if I don't, we're going to be okay. You know that, right?" Sophie nodded, but Lucas could see the worry starting to creep into her expression. She was 6, but she was not stupid. She knew things were not okay. She had heard the phone calls, seen the overdue notices on the kitchen table. Lucas kissed her forehead and stood up. Mrs. Callahan was already waiting at the door to watch her for a few hours. He thanked the older woman, promised he would be back soon, and headed out into the cold. The address Claire had given him led to a mid-sized office building near the center of downtown. It was not flashy, but it was clean and professional, the kind of place where people wore suits and talked about quarterly projections. Lucas felt out of place the moment he walked through the front doors. The receptionist directed him to the 3rd floor, and when he stepped off the elevator, Claire was already waiting for him. She looked different than she had at the cemetery, more composed, more in control. She wore a blazer and slacks, her hair pulled back in the same way, but now she looked like someone who ran things. "Lucas," she said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." He shook her hand, trying not to let his nervousness show. "Thank you for seeing me." Claire led him down a hallway and into a small conference room. She gestured for him to sit, and he did, his hands folded in his lap like he was back in high school, waiting to see the principal. "I'm not going to waste your time," Claire said as she sat down across from him. "I have an opening in sales and customer service. It's entry-level, but it's stable. The pay is decent, and there's room to move up if you're good at it." Lucas nodded. He had never worked in sales before, but he was willing to learn. He was willing to do just about anything at this point. "I'm a fast learner," he said, "and I'll work harder than anyone else you've got." Claire studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I believe you. But I need to be clear about something. I'm offering you this job because I owe your mother a debt I can never fully repay. But once you're here, you're just another employee. I won't give you special treatment, and I won't make excuses for you if you don't pull your weight. Understood?" Lucas met her gaze and nodded. "Understood." "Good," Claire said. "You start Monday." Lucas felt something loosen in his chest, a tightness he had been carrying for weeks, finally easing just slightly. It was not relief, not yet, but it was close. "Thank you," he said quietly. Claire stood and walked him to the door. "Don't thank me yet. Just show up and do the work." Lucas started the following Monday, and the first week was brutal. The job itself was not complicated, but it required a kind of patience and people skills he had not used in years. He spent most of his time on the phone with customers, answering questions about products he barely understood, trying to sound confident and knowledgeable when he felt neither. The other employees were polite but distant. They knew he had been hired through Claire, and it was obvious they assumed he had gotten the job because of some personal connection rather than merit. Lucas could feel their eyes on him whenever he made a mistake, could hear the quiet conversations that stopped when he walked into the break room. He kept his head down and worked. He stayed late when he could, reviewed product manuals during his lunch breaks, practiced his pitch until it sounded natural. He could not afford to fail at this, not when it was the only thing standing between his daughter and the street. Claire watched him, though she never said much. Sometimes he would catch her walking past his desk or standing in the hallway outside the call center where he worked. She never stopped to talk, never offered encouragement or criticism. She just observed. Then, 2 weeks into the job, something happened that almost ended everything. A customer had called in furious about a delayed shipment. Lucas had done everything he could to de-escalate the situation, offering refunds, expedited shipping, anything that might calm the man down. But the customer had already made up his mind. He wanted to speak to a manager, wanted someone fired, wanted Lucas's name so he could file a formal complaint. Lucas had stayed calm through all of it, kept his voice steady and professional even as the man shouted at him. But after the call ended, he sat there at his desk, feeling like he had just lost a fight. The complaint went up the chain quickly. By the end of the day, Lucas was called into a meeting with 2 managers he had never spoken to before. They were polite but firm. The company had a zero-tolerance policy for customer dissatisfaction at this level. They could not afford to keep someone on staff who generated this kind of negative feedback, especially someone so new. Lucas tried to explain what had happened, tried to walk them through the call, but he could see it did not matter. They had already made their decision. He was being let go. He walked out of that meeting expecting to clean out his desk and leave. He had lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and he had already failed. But before he could make it back to his station, Claire appeared in the hallway. She did not say anything, just gestured for him to follow her. They walked to her office in silence, and when the door closed behind them, Claire turned to face him. "I heard about the complaint," she said. Lucas nodded. "I know. I'm sorry. I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough." Claire crossed her arms and leaned against her desk. "I listened to the call." Lucas looked up, surprised. "We record everything," Claire continued. "I pulled the file as soon as I heard what happened. You handled that customer better than half the people we have working here. He was out of line from the start, and you stayed professional the entire time." Lucas did not know what to say. He had assumed the complaint was the end of it, that the recording would only confirm what the managers already believed. "The decision to let you go was made without reviewing the facts," Claire said. "I've overturned it. You're staying." Lucas felt something crack open inside him, something between relief and disbelief. "Why?" Claire looked at him evenly. "Because you're good at this, better than you think you are, and because firing you would have been a mistake." She pushed off the desk and walked toward the door, but before she opened it, she glanced back at him. "Your mother didn't save my life, so I could let her son get thrown out over a bad customer. Don't make me regret this." Lucas nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Claire left, and Lucas stood there alone in her office, trying to process what had just happened. He had been seconds away from losing everything again, and somehow he was still standing. He went back to his desk, logged back into his computer, and got back to work. The weeks that followed were different. Not easier, exactly, but more stable. Lucas kept showing up, kept doing the work, and slowly the other employees stopped looking at him like he did not belong. He was still the new guy, still the one who had gotten in through a connection, but he was proving himself in the only way that mattered. He was good at the job. Claire never mentioned the incident with the complaint again. She did not check in on him, did not offer words of encouragement, or ask how he was adjusting. But Lucas noticed things. Small things. The way she would walk past the call center during his shifts. The way she seemed to know exactly when he had handled a difficult customer well. She was watching, but from a distance, letting him succeed or fail on his own terms. By the end of his second month, Lucas had paid off the back rent. It had taken every dollar of his first 2 paychecks, and he was still living paycheck to paycheck. But the eviction notice was gone. Sophie's school was safe. The apartment was safe. For the first time in months, Lucas could breathe without feeling like the ground was about to collapse beneath him. Then Claire called him into her office. Lucas walked in expecting another routine check-in, maybe a performance review, or some paperwork he needed to sign. Instead, Claire was standing by the window, her arms crossed, looking out at the city below. "Close the door," she said without turning around. Lucas did, then stood there, waiting. The silence stretched longer than it should have, and he started to worry that something had gone wrong, that maybe the complaint had resurfaced, or someone higher up had decided he was not worth keeping after all. Finally, Claire turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable. "I've been reviewing your performance," she said. "Customer feedback, call quality, resolution rates, all of it." Lucas nodded, his stomach tightening. "Is there a problem?" "No," Claire said. "The opposite, actually. You're one of the best hires we've had in the last year." Lucas blinked. He had not expected that. He had been working hard, but he had assumed he was just keeping up, not standing out. Claire walked over to her desk and picked up a folder. She opened it and pulled out a sheet of paper, then handed it to him. Lucas took it and scanned the contents. It was a promotion offer. A different position, better pay, more responsibility. "I'm moving you up," Claire said. "You've earned it." Lucas stared at the paper, trying to process what he was reading. The new salary was nearly double what he had been making. It was enough to not just survive, but to actually start building something. To save, to plan ahead. "I don't know what to say," Lucas said quietly. "You don't have to say anything," Claire replied. "Just keep doing what you've been doing." Lucas looked up at her, and for the first time since they had met, he saw something softer in her expression. Not pity, not charity, but something closer to respect. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Claire leaned back against her desk and crossed her arms again. "Because your mother saved my life, and the best way I can honor that is by making sure her son has a chance to build one of his own." She let the words sit for a moment, then continued. "When I woke up after that surgery, I had no idea if I was going to make it. The doctors told me later that most people in my condition don't survive. But your mother refused to let that happen. She fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Claire's voice was steady, but there was weight behind it. "I spent years telling myself I would come back and thank her. I kept putting it off, kept finding excuses, and then it was too late. I can't repay her anymore, but I can do this. I can make sure the life she gave me means something." Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. He had spent so long thinking of himself as a failure, as someone who had let his mother down, that he had forgotten she would have wanted this for him. Not just survival, but a real chance. "She would have been proud of you," Claire said, "for asking for help when you needed it, for showing up every day even when it was hard. That takes more strength than most people realize." Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Claire straightened and walked back to the window. "Take the weekend to think it over. If you want the position, it's yours on Monday." Lucas left her office with the folder in his hand, his mind still spinning. He did not need the weekend to think it over. He already knew his answer. That Saturday, Lucas took Sophie to the cemetery. It was the first time he had brought her with him since the funeral, and she walked beside him quietly, holding his hand. She did not ask many questions, just stayed close as they made their way through the rows of graves. When they reached his mother's headstone, Lucas knelt down and helped Sophie place a small bouquet of flowers at the base. They were nothing fancy, just something he had picked up at the grocery store on the way over, but they were enough. Sophie stood there for a moment, staring at the name carved into the stone. "Do you think Grandma can see us?" she asked. Lucas looked at his daughter, at the seriousness in her young face, and felt something break open inside him. "Yeah," he said. "I think she can." They stayed there for a while, just the two of them, the wind moving through the bare branches of the tree overhead. Lucas did not say much. He did not need to. His mother had always known what he was thinking, even when he could not find the words. When they finally turned to leave, Lucas noticed someone standing near the cemetery gates. Claire. She was far enough away that she might not have known he had seen her, but Lucas recognized her coat, the way she stood with her shoulders squared. She did not walk over. She did not wave or call out. She just stood there, watching from a distance, and then turned and left. Lucas understood. This was not about gratitude or closure. It was about something quieter, a debt that could never be fully repaid, but could be honored in small, steady ways. Claire had saved him, the same way his mother had saved her. And now, Lucas had a chance to keep that chain going. He looked down at Sophie, who was tugging on his hand, ready to go home. "Come on, Dad. I'm hungry." Lucas smiled, a real smile for the first time in what felt like months. "All right, let's get you something to eat." They walked out of the cemetery together, past the gates and into the cold morning air. The city was waking up around them, cars passing on the street, people heading to work or running errands. The world kept moving, indifferent and relentless, but Lucas did not feel crushed by it anymore. He had a job. He had a future. He had his daughter safe and fed and happy. And somewhere out there, a woman who owed his mother everything had made sure he had a chance to stand on his own. The debt his mother had left behind was not one that could be measured in dollars or counted in favors. It was something deeper, something that passed from one life to the next, carried forward by people who remembered what it meant to be saved. Lucas did not know what would come next. He did not know if he would succeed in this new position, or if there would be more obstacles waiting around the corner. But for the first time in a long time, he believed he could handle it, because his mother had taught him how to fight, and Claire had given him a reason to keep fighting. That was enough.